So David, good morning and welcome to our inquiry into private equity. Can I ask you to remind us why you undertook this role and what you hope to achieve for the private equity industry as a result of your chairmanship of this group?
Thank you, Chairman. I was asked to take on this review at the end of February by the private equity industry, though I'd want to say that although I confirmed that I would indeed undertake the review, it wasn't for the private equity industry. I made clear from the beginning my interest was in trying to create a structure, if that were possible, that was in the interests of the United Kingdom public interest. So as I've said to you and to this committee before, approached it as an independent. My object was to see whether this imbalance between the very substantial rights of ownership that were being acquired by private equity, the rate of accumulation of which had accelerated in the 18 months, 2 years before the spring of this year, might not be better matched with a sense of obligation on the part of the industry to be more transparent and more open about their activities. I'm very happy to take this further in detail, Chairman, but perhaps I'd say now that in the process, the strongest sense that has emerged in my mind is of the inadequacy of our understanding, including, I have to say, my own, but I think that goes for us all, of the economic impact of private equity. Okay. And the reason for that is...
So your objective was to make private equity more transparent?
Yes.
Okay. How would you respond to the allegations, quite a lot of allegations in the newspapers that you've watered down your final guidelines? For example, attribution analysis, now an industry-wide issue, giving private equity companies longer to publish accounts, from 4 to 6 months, give them the option of an annual report or updating their website, and in terms of the private equity firms which come into this scheme, increasing the £300 million figure for private equity companies, 500 million for unlisted companies, having a figure of 1,000 staff at least employed, and having at least half the revenues in the United Kingdom. Now, those are quite a number of changes from your interim document, and both the Financial Times and the Daily Telegraph, I think, feel that you've been got at. And the Daily Telegraph, for example, when they talk about the arbitrary cut-off, says it shows that the real point of all this is public relations and keeping the unions at bay. Now, that's the Telegraph talking. So what's your response to that?
I'd focus on the substance, Chairman, and say most of it's insubstantial. I'll begin by saying that nothing that is in the Green document, or the final report, published just 3-4 weeks ago, in the light of the comment that's been made, there's nothing there that I would want to change in any direction. But the allegations are just false, largely. There are 1 or 2 areas, and I'll identify those up front, where we did dilute what was proposed. The most significant in my mind was extending the period for reporting by portfolio companies their annual reports and accounts from the 4 months, which is the quoted company regime, to 6 months, and for their mid-term reviews from 2 months to 3 months. And I had in mind there that although some of the companies that go into private equity come from the public markets were quoted and would have little difficulty in moving from 4 months from the 9 months that's allowed for private companies, for companies that have come from that were previously private companies, the reporting burden and pressure on the accounting and finance function in a firm, when they're going through very frequently a radical process of change at the beginning of the private equity process, was unreasonable. So I thought that it was sensible to allow them a bit more time. That is in my view, only material let's call it dilution. Let me take...
Yeah, but the attribution analysis, for example,
yes,
you suggested in individual firms so that we could decide whether the monies were coming from financial engineering, multiple expansion or operational improvements, and now it's on an industry-wide basis. So that seems a big opportunity lost there, Sir David.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I comprehensively disagree. What you're asking for, and it became increasingly...
But you made it very clear in your original document that you wanted attribution analysis for each company.
Yes.
And you've changed your mind.
But I had a 4-month consultation process. I'm surprised that you should appear to be suggesting that I wasn't attentive to the consultation process. We consulted 70 people. There were 70 points of contact.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all, Sir David, but what I'm suggesting is that somebody like yourself, who's so well versed in the private equity industry, had spent a lifetime in banking, came out with such very firm comments in your original report, then went backwards at 100 miles per hour. That's what I'm suggesting.
Chairman, I didn't go backwards, if I'd be allowed to respond to your question.
Of course you did.
I concluded that I'm absolutely clear that the importance of attribution analysis is as greater than I described in the July document. So I'm completely with that proposition. If I were pressed by this committee or elsewhere, what's the most important element in the whole report? High-quality attribution analysis will be very high on my list. Why did I move away from the requirement that this be done by individual firms? It was to avoid, Chairman, perverse incentives. I did not realise in July the power of the perverse incentive that would be put in place, and that I won't put my name to. What I have in mind is if we required individual firms now to produce their own attribution analyses, the invitation to them to put the most favourable possible spin on their performance would be irresistible. What they'd seek to do, I have to say, and you refer to my experience in financial services, I know what would happen. They would seek to display very little significance from financial engineering, very little significance from the rise in market multiples, and a superior performance as a result of their enhancement of operational improvement. So the conclusion to which I came, which is a step on the way, which I think is true for quite a lot that's in my report, is what we need to do first is to establish a clear template to take as much of the subjectivity out of the attribution analysis as is possible. In the 3 or 4 months, we made very great progress with all the firms in discussion of a methodology for attribution analysis. My pretty confident expectation is that about a year from now there will be a template which they can all be held to, and that will be the point to review the question, should they be asked or required to produce these analyses individually. But at the moment I'm extremely concerned that if we were to require what I had in mind in July, we just give a perverse incentive. And what would be produced would be non-comparable and I think frankly misleading. They would all want to show how well they've done.
Okay. Do you believe your proposed guidelines go far enough to quell public disquiet over the activities of private equity firms, especially given that these guidelines include nothing on remuneration and are silent on the taxation of private equity?
Well, as you know, Chairman, I wasn't asked to look at taxation, so I've no comment to make about that. Plainly, the taxation area is an important issue.
Mr. David, it was surely you had a free hand as Chairman to decide what you wanted to do.
Well, I was given terms of reference that did not extend to tax, Chairman, as I've said to you before.
Did you make any comments to them about that?
No, I did not.
It was lopsided then?
No, I did not. Well, it is lopsided, absolutely, yes. But if I'd spent as much time on the tax questions as I've spent on transparency and openness and disclosure, I mean, I presume to give a view to the committee, but I have not spent that time on the tax questions. On the question of remuneration, I've spent a lot of time and given it a lot of thought. And those who seek disclosure of the remuneration of executives in private equity firms will continue to be disappointed. And I don't think, let me give very briefly the reasons.
So we'll come on to that later on with some other questions. Okay. So David, I mentioned earlier about taxation. Previously we had John Moulton of Alchemy Partners here, and he made the point to us about management fees, where he's talking about the art of not paying tax. And he had it very clearly for us. He says, first set up a partnership to run the fund. The UK Limited Partnership, contemplated by the Memorandum of Understanding of the BBC and Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, is perfect. He goes on to say, consider a £1,000 million fund with a 1.5% annual quote management fee payable to the private equity firm. That's the general partner. The general partner is entitled to draw £15 million per annum from the partnership. What the agreement says is that he can pick and choose which of the partnership's cash flow he gets the £15 million from. The point is that GPs, general partners, get taxed on the cash flows depending on the character of the cash flows. But being intelligent, general partners select non-taxable cash flows, for example the repayment of a loan at par, which do not appear on tax returns at all. This is easy to arrange. Now I mention that to you as part of the background, Sir David, where maybe suspicion is prevalent and there's a need to try and demolish that. And I'm going on to my final point with you on saying that you have mentioned yourself that private equity is private to the extent of secrecy. I am grateful to you as chairman of the committee for your courtesy to me and the committee for keeping us informed of your deliberations, and I think you've made a valiant effort. We realise, generally, private equity is here to stay. The focus was on highly leveraged buyouts, and certainly those private equity firms that have spoken to me over the months, they want to remove themselves from the limelight. But to do that, there has to be meaningful engagement and transparency on that. I would put it to you, Sir David, that your report fails to tackle or doesn't go far enough on a number of big issues. Silent on taxation, and I mentioned to you, that point for you. Vague in communication with employees and other stakeholders. Nothing on executive remuneration. Watered down attribution analysis. Discretion on reporting requirements. Uncertainty about how and whether compliance will be enforced. And if it is enforced, then people leave the BVCA and the guidelines don't apply and they go on their merry way. And as Mr Fallon says, no level playing field with other private firms. Isn't the consequence that your proposal will satisfy no one? You'll continue to be disliked by the private equity firms, in your words, on that, and you'll continue to be viewed with suspicion by stakeholders. I put it to you, Sir David, does Will Hutton have a point when he says, in describing your code, that it is one of the less honourable moments in private equity history?
Well, I think I listed mentally in the observations you made, Chairman, about 15 points, and I think my observation on them, and I don't know whether I have time to respond,
yeah, sure,
allowed to respond, is no, 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 and no.
That's good.
But if I could start with the matter which is not my responsibility, and how could it be, and I don't believe you're seriously suggesting it should be. John Moulton and others have mentioned practices of the kind that he's mentioned to you, and my reaction as a UK taxpayer is one of revulsion from them. And if that sort of evasion, that's not avoidance, I think that's evasion, is going on, then it's a matter for HMRC and the Treasury to deal with it. And I feel as strongly about that as anyone. I didn't write down the specific points you made, but if I take some of them, I mean, I've explained why I believe the voluntary guidelines approach is the right approach, and I think Parliament would be singularly ill-advised to seek to legislate across the board in this area, though to take a point that was made, I think, by Mr Cousins, I mean, if you look at 4175, I think there's a perfectly good case for saying something like 4175 should apply to, all big private companies. As to communication with employees, which I forgot the adjective you used, but I think something like inadequate, I attach very great importance to that. And I don't think what's in place is vague. We have powerful provisions in statute, one of which, according to the TUC, needs to be enforced more effectively. And I have laid out very clearly why I think it's important for private equity firms to communicate at inflection points in their lives. As to the attribution analysis, I'm hesitant about saying any more. There has been no watering down.
Okay. So, David, can we thank you for your assistance to the committee and for the opportunity to discuss this report. As I mentioned, you've always been very open and courteous with us, and I thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Chairman.